Hello, I'm Rachel. Welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to make an update video for you on my houseplants that I put moss on. All preserved moss, of course, because I don't really want to take the time to keep live moss alive. I've done that just fine in terrariums before and it's been great, but this is just for top dressing for my plants. And you can find the video that I did that in the iCard and also in the description box below, and maybe I'll link it at the end. I don't know, we'll see. So I used a few different kinds of preserved moss. I used like sheet moss, and I used forest moss, Spanish moss, and some reindeer moss. For the most part, I haven't really seen a huge difference in my plants, except for like my ferns and really water hungry plants. It seems to be really good for them and beneficial, which is a little different than what I've been thinking, because I think the water evaporates from the soil and creates some more humidity around the plant itself. But I'm finding that my ferns don't actually need a lot of excess humidity for them to do good. It's just having the moss around on the bottom has made it to where they're holding moisture in at their roots a lot longer, and that's making them do much better. So usually I try not to overwater my plants, and I try to let them dry out quite a bit between watering, but for some of my plants it's just helping them hold on to moisture longer and for them to do better. Especially now that it's getting really warm, I'm finding that it's really helping the plants keep moisture in that have moss on top versus the plants that don't. The plants that don't, I'm having to water more than in the winter, because that's usual. Once it gets warmer, usually I have to water a little bit more, and they're growing, of course, so they're using more water. But my plants that have moss on them, I haven't needed to water them nearly as much, and they're doing just as good as they did before, some of them better, just because they're able to grow faster, it seems, and just hold on to that moisture and not have any of that time period where they've lost too much moisture and they're too dried out. So it's really interesting, that sort of idea, that and this thought process in my mind of actually keeping the soil moist for longer. So like my peperomioides and my ferns, my monstera, my fig tree, my fiddle leaf fig, I didn't put any on my fig tree. My fig tree's outside now. My arrowheads, all sorts of different plants I put this on, they're all staying super happy and great. But now my climbing fig, I need to put some moss on that. I just haven't really thought about it because it's hanging up. I definitely need to put some moss on it so that way it can hold the moisture in longer and not dry out and then all of a sudden die. Same with my maidenhair vine, because my maidenhair vine does really so great and it's amazing, but it definitely needs to be watered at least every week and a half, if not more. It just can dry out a little faster, and then once it does dry out, it's such a thin-leaved plant that what happens when a plant dries out is the cells just kind of collapse, and then once you rehydrate it, it can't quite fully expand to how it was originally. Now, I am getting a plant in that can do that, hopefully, if it works out. I have a pretty interesting haul coming up eventually once all the stuff gets here, but we shall see about that one. Anyways, the moss, like all the different kinds of moss, have just worked perfectly fine. Every single kind. They all worked about the same. Now, I find that the Spanish moss it's fluffier and it can have moisture up higher. And so that one gives a little bit more aeration, but it also has more moisture on top of it. It just seems to have it more evenly throughout it, whereas the forest moss and the sheet moss tend to have it more on the bottom layer of the moss, like where it's like brown, and then the green layer on top doesn't tend to have too much moisture. Sorry, Gunther and his sister are having a play date, and yeah, they're playing. It's pretty darn cute. Here. The one problem that I did come across was with my African violets. I put some moss on one of them just to try it out, and because I used the Spanish moss on it, and because it's so fluffy, I'm sure that the other mosses would do this if they were close enough to the stems. There's too much moisture around it, and it was, you know, making the stems basically rot. And but you know how you're not supposed to get water on the leaves? I tend to find that that's not as big of a deal, but for me anyways, when I water them, I try not to water them on their leaves and stuff so that way they don't burn or whatever. But the moss, definitely having it down around underneath it, made the leaves that were touching it rot and, you know, just turn mushy and disgusting. So I took that off of there, and the African violets really do not need it. I just wanted to see if it would make it look pretty, because my African violets, I got them when they were all stretching already, and once they start stretching, it's not as easy to make them sit as nicely in a pot as it is other, like, you know, succulent types of plants. I just wanted to use some of that to make it look a little nicer and to cover up that little stalk, the big old fat stem on them, and so that didn't work as well as I'd planned. So just so you know, oh, my husband has solar panels in the background. Okay, now you can't see his solar panels. Okay. Other kinds of top dressing that you can use on your plants are, of course, like rocks, different kinds of pebbles and things. And you can also use sand on top of your plants. Oh, the cobbler's done. So you can use sand on top of your plants as well. Supposedly it's supposed to help with fungus gnats, so that way they can't lay their eggs, or the little babies can't hatch through, they can't go through the sand, it's too fine. Other kinds of things that you could use, I use mulch, actually, like not mulch, just because I don't really know what all has been on that, because I don't know if it molds or whatever, gets some sort of weird fungus on it. I just don't want to worry about that. I do use the potting medium for orchids on top of some of my plants. I do that for outside as well. I just think that it looks nice. And for my plants outside, actually, it really helped those ones in my pots to stay happier through the really hot summers. And so for like my hostas, it looked really nice on. It gave it a little bit of top dressing, especially because like this year my hostas are filling out the pot a lot more, and so they don't need any other plants around them. And so having that layer of orchid potting medium, it made it to where it looked prettier and nicer, to where you just see the bark instead of the perlite and everything, you know, that's in the potting mix. It just looked really nice and definitely helped them not to dry out as fast. And I used that on all of my pots actually outside last year, because I had a ton of it that I did not need to keep around. Just, you know, I figured I might as well use it and try it out. I just really wanted to give you a little update on my plants and on how the moss is working for them. I didn't put it on too many of my succulents just because I didn't like how it looked. I definitely prefer the look of, I like brown rocks, more darker toned rocks, so that way when the dirt gets on them, because that always seems to happen, is like when I water it, somehow some of the dirt gets up on the top and it just looks terrible to me. So I like to use more neutral colored rocks. And I've used sand before and it works fine. I just definitely like it. I have the same problem with the sand as with the rocks, so sometimes I'll do a layer of sand and then rocks on top. And because it's like you water the sand and somehow always I can just get dirt on the top and then it just ruins the whole effect. So I like to put rocks on top of the sand. Yeah. I hope you found this video helpful and informative, and if you have any questions and comments and helpful things, tips for the rest of us, and please do put them in the comment section. I will talk to you later. Have a really great week. Bye!